All right, welcome everybody, and thank you for listening to WRUU-LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Science Community Radio with Global Soul. This is the Adam Messer Show, and I'm your host, Adam Messer. And Sebastian, do you mind playing some live music for us? Here we go. This is Sebastian Messer, everybody. Dude, how are you liking that Ovation guitar?
I like it a lot.
Pretty cool, yeah. Pretty cool. Isn't that the same one you said Jim Croce played?
Mm-hmm.
Nice. And you got that from your grandma Connie.
Yes.
So that's pretty sweet. So everybody, welcome back. This is the second hour of the show, and my special guest today is a man named Jason Usry. Jason, welcome back, man.
Thank you.
Dude, I'm so glad. I love talking with you, dude, about like creative stuff. Because you just I always feel like I pick something up from you, and like I know you're always working on stuff, and I love talking to other people who are the doers. You know, there's a lot of creators out there that have like ideas, but there are a lot of folks like my friend Bobby Nash. He put it this way the other day. He said if you had a nickel for every time somebody said, "I'm gonna write a story," and they never follow through. So.
Well, the feeling is mutual, man. You are one of the busiest people I know, and I really look up to you for all the things that you do. So thanks for having me on and for those words.
Well, hey man, I have to tell everybody like how the first time we ever actually met in person. Like, okay, so over at King George Boulevard, I was over with Ed Susevich. And I stopped at the little gas station there, and I saw this guy, and I was like, "Man, those are some cool red shoes." And like we had connected on Facebook before that,
right?
But we had never met in person or whatever. And then you sent me a message later on, like hey, that was me. And I was like, what? And then we met up for the Savannah Podcasters Association. And so like this hour, I want to talk with you about your radio production stuff,
Sure.
I know people call it podcasts, everybody, but really podcasts are the same thing as radio. I mean, like it's just an audio version of a show. So a podcast, I think the intention is having episodic, versions of the show, but isn't that the same thing with the radio? I mean, like a radio show, you could have a serialized show, you could have a talk show like this. I mean, you could have, there's a lot of different things. An audiobook, even to me, reminds me of early radio because they used to do all those radio serials before they did television.
Sure.
And I'm a big fan of audiobooks and a big fan of radio and stuff like that. So can you tell the folks at home, like the first hour we were talking about your film production and stuff, but can you tell the folks about your podcasting / radio works and stuff like that you do?
Yeah, sure. So I guess first off, I produce the End of Watch with Boots and Sal podcast, which is a law enforcement focused podcast that talks about the experience of people who have served, both military, law enforcement, first responders, their experiences from their personal and professional front lines. A big focus of that show is the impact that service has on individuals, both during their service and then after.
And that's with Kevin Grogan and Lou Velosi, right?
So Kevin Grogan is Bootsy and Lou Velosi is Sal. Both of them have been in law enforcement. Between the two of them, 40 plus years of service.
I always think about that one line that Lou said. He was like, have I earned the right to judge?
Right.
That has resonated with me. That's something I think about a lot because, it's kind of one of those guideline things like, okay, you have to act, you have to, live your life, and I'm not saying not to be decisive, like we were talking about being decisive last hour, but
Yeah,
there's certain times where it's like, we all judge. When they say
sure.
don't judge a book by its cover, that's exactly what we do. We look at a poster for a movie, we look at a book cover, and we judge. We see
Right.
a person and how they look, and we judge.
Yeah.
And that, have I earned the right to judge? That's been a really good marker for me, because I'm like,
Right.
you know what, I haven't, so I need to shut up.
And
I
well,
need, I need to be quiet.
I think that both of their and their respective agencies, they sort of that that tenet of their lives really was refined because I mean nobody is coming at life from the same starting point. People are battling their own individual circumstances, and that doesn't mean everybody needs to go to jail or whatever. And so,
Or
the,
cancel cultured stuff.
yeah,
Like, I mean,
yeah,
honestly, I think people make mistakes, but the whole cancel culture thing is just getting really crazy.
yeah, and both of them had great careers, and they learned. There's the law, and then there's I think understanding individual circumstances, and I think it informed the way that they view the world, and they offer some really great insight, both on their time, in their respective careers, but also the demons that they face. Both very, very open and honest about how they dealt with the stress of the job and how it impacted their personal lives, and not in pretty ways. And that was what really drew me to them. I had actually reached out to Kevin because I wanted to talk to him. I just wanted. He wrote a book called Black Sheep, White Cop, and I wanted to talk to him about his process of writing that book. And it just so happened that, backtracking just quickly to Deadwater, the manager who manages Asper, Van Deen, and Judd Nelson first also manages Kevin's producing partner for the movie Black Sheep, White Cop. And it was kind of just one of those happy
I didn't
accidents.
know that they were coming up with a movie for that.
Yeah, well, I've helped Kevin adapt. He had a screenplay, and I've helped him kind of polish it up, and so we're trying to get that done as well.
Yeah,
Uh,
Kevin came to last year my Savannah Authors Expo
mhm.
as one of the authors, and he had reached out to me. I didn't know him at the time, but he had reached out to me about this, and then we became friends after that. And I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. And yeah, he was on the show with his fiance or
Yeah,
girlfriend or whatever, and they were doing the Rescue Radar.
absolutely, which is a
So
great series. Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah. Kevin is a super creative guy. He's a bulldog. Like you don't. There aren't very many. There's probably no one else in the world that that you would want in your corner than Kevin. Like he is just so focused, and he really wants to get things done. Which, as we were talking about, being doers.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, when I
But
first met Kevin, I was like, I wasn't sure about him
yeah,
because I was like, he comes off like really, he does have that, really staunch, kind of like standoffish kind of attitude. And then when you get to know him, you're like, man, this guy's a funny and smart guy and really nice guy.
yeah, man. He's my brother now, and yeah, and that was kind of the thing. Like we met to talk about that, and then he said, "Hey, me and my buddy are trying to get this podcast off the ground. Do you know anything about that?" And I knew a little bit about it, and I said, "Well, I'm kind of like on the beginning part, but I've got a couple of ideas that I wanted to develop, and I was like, this would be a good chance to kind of learn it. It would force me to learn it. And so I met Lou, and Lou, as you know, is this tattooed Italian guy who has really seen some pretty wild things in his career. But both of those guys have just been so good to me. And
I had to laugh because when y'all came to the studio, like I'm 6 foot tall and I'm like 230,
yeah,
and like Lou makes me look small compared to like the way I make other people look small.
yeah,
And I was laughing because I was like, this is like the first time I'm not the biggest guy in the picture.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah, he's a big dude. He's a big
he's a
dude.
big, dude, and he's
He's not
he's
the kind
seen.
of guy you'd want to cross. So, I mean, there's a reason why he
No,
was one of those undercover agents.
absolutely, man. And
Yeah.
he saw so many different things. And I mean, he worked on some legendary undercover cases and that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, he talks very openly about. He and Kevin both talk very openly about the toll that the job took on them and their personal lives.
Mm-hmm.
And we, again, a big focus of the podcast is talking to um, law enforcement about the mental aspect of the job and how, I mean, especially right now, how
Yeah.
difficult to just be a cop or just be an agent. And we've had some really great guests. Jay Dobbins, who infiltrated the Hells Angels, um, Chris Bayless, who brought down who was both was Lou's mentor
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of his undercover operations. Captain Dale Dye, who spent a long time in the service and now is an advisor, technical advisor at Hollywood. There are a lot of people, and he comes to mind because I just was emailing with his wife this morning about another guest for this next season's podcast. And so we've got some really great perspectives, and we try to leave the politics on the table, because everybody has different ideas right now, but just talk about the person and the work
Mm-hmm.
and the way it impacts you, because it impacts everybody differently. And it's a really important show. And I think the importance of it is increasing right now with the stressors that are kind of bombarding everybody at the moment.
I love how your show shows the human behind the badge. I love how that it really explores the human being behind the badge. So.
Yeah, it's not so black and white.
Mm-hmm.
It is this very nuanced thing. I mean, they're people too, and and talking to the two of them, they've done we've done your show, and then they've done some additional shows that really kind of dig into that, like really.
It's so crazy because that was one of the last shows that I was able to do in the studio before all the COVID stuff. Um,
Oh, that was what's it, February or March?
yeah, yeah. They restricted it in April, and
Okay,
and I, I feel like this year's been just a crazy year for everybody.
sure.
We were talking last hour, kind of like how the sceneries change for people with filmmaking,
Right.
and with podcasting. Really, it's a show. You're producing a show.
Hmm.
If it were, I don't know, people put podcasts on YouTube. People put podcasts on like a lot of different outlets. There's, I mean, a million different apps, it seems like.
Sure.
And but it comes back to a show. Like you got a certain focus, and you do your theme, and you move forward with that. And
Right.
so when you first started off doing that, like obviously you had background in screenwriting, and background in television production and marketing and stuff like that. How did you transition from? And I've got to ask you this question, but then I got to do the station ID before you answer.
Okay.
All right, everybody, you're listening to WRUU LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul. So, how did you transition those skill sets or leverage up those skill sets that you had moving into a podcast production with Into Watch with Bootsy and Sal?
Well, I've been fortunate in that I work in television,
Mm-hmm.
and that has given me a lot of skills, from both a video production standpoint and audio production standpoint. And so, before I agreed to do this with Kevin, and before I met Lou, I felt confident that I could bring something to the table for them. The other thing that I'm fairly decent at is investigating and finding out where I can get guests. Like we just landed a big, I can't name the person yet, but yesterday I hunted down an appropriate email address for a guest that we've been trying to get for months, and
That's
was
actually a
able to.
sidebar topic I want to talk about when you
Okay.
finish, because I want to talk
Yeah.
about getting guests too.
Yeah. And so I was able to find that person and email them, and they literally within 5 minutes wrote back and said, yeah, I'd love to do it. So, we've, I had kind of the technical expertise already. It was just really kind of understanding, and I think, basically whatever medium that I work in, I want to tell good stories from strong voices, and kind of use that platform to educate, entertain, or inspire people. And I
Yeah,
think that a lot of what our podcast does is that, and we've found a really nice little community of other podcasters and storytellers in this medium, that which I'm actually partnering up with a couple of them as well. We can talk about later, but um, that have been super supportive as well. So it wasn't really a giant shift in my mind, my thinking. It's just kind of a different set of tools.
yeah, that's what I was saying about leveraging like the skill sets you already had into the
Mhm.
production value of this show that you're doing. So, talking about booking guests, um, I've written for the Savannah Morning News like as a freelance journalist since 2014, and I noticed that like with that, if I say, hey, I'd like to interview you, for the Savannah Morning News, like I get a quicker response sometimes than I do for like saying, hey, I'd like to interview you for my radio show.
Hmm.
And I've I've interviewed celebrities. I've interviewed, you know, I'm not trying to break my back here, patting my own self on the back. I'm not saying that. It's just I just want to share with you. But I've had celebrities that I've interviewed, and different authors, like
Yeah.
best-selling authors and stuff like that. And I always find it funny when I get like, for example, a person that I'll say, hey, I'm interested in talking with you because I feel like it would be a good fit for the show and the audience. I always feel like it's kind of funny when that person will big time me, or is a way to say it. Like I had one recently that did that to me. Sent a message over through their contact information or whatever, and they said, "Oh yeah, that'd be great. You can hire me as a guest speaker." And I'm like, "No, it's a community radio station. I'm not hiring anybody. It's a
Right.
Um, but it's just funny because sometimes you get people who are very gracious and who are
Sure.
receptive, and then you get some folks that they're not. And I think that kind of goes back to what I was talking about in the last hour about the production of like, hey, everybody's on the same cylinder, firing on the same page or whatever.
Right.
You get some people who are a gamers, and they're like, yeah, let's do this, and then some people won't respond, and then you get some people who will respond but they might big time you, and then you get some people who like like, oh yeah, I'd love to do it
Sure.
um but I feel like it's important to get through their gatekeepers,
Right.
because a lot of folks have social media assistants, um, and they, it might be like some 19-year-old kid that doesn't
Right.
understand how to communicate effectively. They know how to do social media great, but other than that, they're not really good communicators. And so one of the ways that I book guests is just saying, hey, this is what I've got. This is what the kind of show that I do, and this is what I want to do. I'd love to have you on as a guest or whatever. How do you approach booking guests for your show?
Well, so a couple months ago, I created a one sheet for some of our bigger name guests. Now we're fortunate in that the law enforcement community um, is sort of insular, so you know,
A lot of folks
uh,
know each other,
yeah, it's a small world,
and then
and
once you
so
pass the credentialing part, they automatically know, like,
uh,
this. Yeah,
yeah, I mean, we put Jay Dobbins, who's been a very very super helpful. In fact, before I knew Bootcamp Sal, I read his book um, when I was heading to Las Vegas 10 years ago. Um, and I was like, man, this is a really great book. And now he and I are Facebook friends, and he's helped us, grow our podcast.
Mm-hmm.
The law enforcement community is super, super supportive of its own. So that has helped us. Now like I said, I built a one sheet that every new guest or potential guest, I send the one sheet and I send them a link or two that I think resonates with their specific experience. And we do have kind of a number of different topics that we've covered. We had Steve Murphy and Javier from the DEA Narcos, the movie, the Netflix series Narcos. They're the basis for that show. So we've had them. Had Victor Avila, who was he and Mark were assaulted in Mexico. We've had forensic psychologists, Dr. Scott and Dr. Shiloh from the LA Not So Confidential podcast. So I'm actually working with them on some things. And we've had kind of a large breadth of military professionals, different operators from different agencies, undercover. Jack Garcia, who went undercover and brought down one of the helped to seriously bring down or take it to its knees one of the Italian crime families in New York City. I mean, we've had all these different guests who have this breadth of experience, and we can kind of target our ask to people and say, okay, this person's military, like we use this show. This person's DEA, we will use this show. So, yeah, I think a lot of it's kind of like what media is. It's just kind of playing to your audience and trying to connect with them on that level.
Yeah, because I feel like that's important, like when I talk to people about doing interviews, because when I do the newspaper interview, for example, I have a certain formula that I like to use. And then when I do the radio show, I do the same kind of thing. I have a certain formula I like to use. But on the radio show, I like to do like a casual conversation style. I'll ask questions, but it's not a Q&A.
Right.
When I'm doing it for the newspaper, it is more of a Q&A, but it's a soft Q&A. It's not like a hard, because I don't do hardline news. I don't do, politics or crime or anything like that. I do events and things like that. Or like a book launch. I'm getting ready to cover a new book that just came out about the Leopolds, and I'll have like a different style like that. But finding the guests, like right now the show I'm booked up through December, but it wasn't always like that. I wasn't always booked that far in advance. Like when I first started the show, it was a 1-hour show. And I keep hitting that darn filter. But it was a 1-hour show. And then, I got to the point where I was like, having more people, and I wanted to do a 2-hour show. So sometimes I'll do like 2 guests and, 1 hour or whatever. Or, most of the time I'll do it where I'll talk to, someone like yourself for 2 hours. And, I just feel like it's, for me, like if I get somebody who big times me, I just move on. Like,
yeah.
I'm just like, thank you anyway for your time. I always try to be professional.
Sure.
I've got one guy that I've been trying to get since like last year. And every time I message his assistant, like he's had 2 or 3 different new assistants or whatever this year. And like every time I message like, hey, I just want to check back with it. Oh, I've got somebody new. I'm like,
wow.
Get it together, man. Like,
wow.
I'm just trying to book you. Guy's a great guy. I love his stuff, but it's one of those things where I'm like, dude, it doesn't take 10 months to book, a show. If you want to do it, you want to do it. If you don't, just say so,
Yeah.
But every so often I'll check back in with the guy and say, hey, just want to check in with you, see, I know that you haven't been doing any of your events this year because of COVID, but I haven't said that to him yet, but I'm like, originally it was like, oh, so booked up with events, and I'm like, oh, really? Yeah. You are? Okay.
Absolutely.
But you kind of, I try to take fun, have fun with it and kind of roll with it.
Yeah.
So that you were saying that you got some other shows that you're working on now, right?
Yeah, yeah. No, I mentioned briefly a minute ago the LA Not So Confident podcast. I'm sort of a creative support guy for them with their YouTube videos. They are Dr. Shiloh and Dr. Scott. We actually did a crossover episode, the End of Watch podcast, did a crossover episode with them
Nice.
back in May, I think, and it was really great. I mean, of course, they dealt. Actually, Dr. Shiloh was a cop for the first part of her career, and so she could really relate to kind of that on the job sort of stressor with Kevin and Lou, and the two of them are just fantastic, wonderful people who've been really kind, and they kind of brought me on to kind of help some of their YouTube stuff that we're looking at growing with them, and so they've just been fantastic people. They do something called Get Vocal every other Saturday. They just did one last night, so in 2 weeks from yesterday, they'll do another one where they let fans come on and just talk to them about whatever, which is fun because they're so smart. Then also, I'm going to be taking over editing duties for another podcast called Dialogue, which is with Rebecca Sebastian, which is a true crime conversation where she talks to different people in true crime world. Sometimes it's we actually had Kevin and Lou actually got on her show as well, but she talks to authors and TV producers and different people in the space, and that show is a little different from most true crime shows in that she's discussing from it's not like the facts and figures. It's more talking about kind of the thought behind things. And
I'll tell you one that I've been following lately, like a true crime one, is this video blogger or whatever vlogger, but her name is Bailey Sarian. I think is how you
yeah,
say her last name.
the makeup lady.
Yeah, man, I've been sharing her videos, but I've been following her stuff because she does like a longer version of it on YouTube, but then she does like a 10-minute version.
Okay.
And I've been following that because I don't know, it's just really interesting to me the way she does the storytelling for it. And I've always loved true crime stuff.
Sure.
I've always loved like forensic files, and then back in the day it was like the unsolved mysteries, and I've always liked that true crime kind of stuff. And I feel like that's one of the because people like detective noir stuff.
Sure.
They like mysteries. And true crime, it just fits right in, with the nonfiction side of everything. So
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that people survival is an incredibly probably the most important instinct a human can have, and I think that true crime taps into that instinct with people, and you do have to kind of have your own different perspective. I mean, there's only so many times you can hear about a case and hear the same dates and times and facts and figures and whatever. But like again with Rebecca, she's talking to authors and producers about how they approach things. With Scott and Shiloh, they're talking about the psychology behind these different crimes, and it's just super interesting, for me as a creator myself to have a little bit of extra access to the three of them. It's really cool.
yeah, I completely agree. I think it's pretty sweet. We've got to do the mid-hour break, and so everybody, you are listening to WRUU LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul. Here's Sebastian Messer playing some live music.
This portion of WRUU Savannah Soundings programming is brought to you by listeners and the Ships of the Sea Museum. The wait is over. The Ships of the Sea Museum has reopened. Learn about the West Broad Street School, the first publicly funded school for Black children in Savannah. See one of 2 surviving weather kiosks in the country. And Ships of the Sea new Tour Buddy app allows everyone to discover what makes Savannah, Savannah. More information can be found at shipsofthesea.org. Many critical issues are facing the residents of Savannah and all Americans, including the coronavirus, homeschooling, and the upcoming general election. WRUU has 3 programs which address these issues: The Common Good on Fridays from 2 to 3 p.m., The Happy Homeschooler on Wednesdays from 2 to 3 p.m., and We the People, The Constitution Today on Sundays from 8 to 9 p.m. Stay informed about these important issues by tuning into these programs on WRUU.
WRUU 107.5 FM is a new and different listener-supported and all-volunteer community radio station for Savannah. Our diverse broadcast and web programming is supported by generous listeners who value our passion and spunk. We are independent of other media and receive no government or large corporate support. People like you are our largest and most important source of our funding. Go to wruu.org to find out how you can make a one-time or a monthly contribution. Thank you.
All right, everybody. Thank you. And speaking of Bill Cooper, that was Bill Cooper was the one that did that last announcement. Bill Cooper, Jason, he's got this show that he does every week called Postcards from Lowell. And yeah, it's on Wednesdays. He does it on his Facebook. He's the guy that does the show right after this, the Savannah at Night group, and does comedy. He's the guy I was talking about last hour. We're playing the devil in that live action show that we've got coming up for Dead Pixel Pictures. And so this show that he does every week, he reminisces, talking about like storytelling and stuff. He reminisces about stories as a kid and different things that as a kid with Lowell, like where he grew up. And I thought it was kind of neat because we were talking about with podcasting or doing different shows or whatever. Like there's more than a million different ideas out there of things that people can do as shows. So I really think it's kind of neat. I want to give him a little shout out because he does his Postcards with Lowell on Facebook every Wednesday. So I thought it was pretty cool. But Bill Cooper's a swell guy.
Yeah.
So talking about ideas for a show, I read something about podcasts, that there are, I don't know how many millions of viewers watch YouTube or how many billions of YouTube hits or views there are every year, but that podcasts are really still in the developing stages, even though to me like radio has been around before television or whatever. Podcasts, people consume podcasts a little differently than they do radio, right? So I feel like it's a challenge, to kind of penetrate that market and get discovered by a listener, right? So when you're talking about like the different podcasts, it's true crime, the law enforcement community, the not so confidential, the LA not so confidential. That kind of thing. How is it with finding that audience? How do you build and find that audience and reach out with your shows?
Well, in terms of building, I can only really talk about End of Watch. I kind of am riding the coattails with Dr. Shiloh and Dr. Scott and Rebecca Sebastian on their shows. They've already built their following, and both have very popular podcasts. I think Rebecca's podcast Dialogue is it finds itself in the top 100 true crime podcasts in the world occasionally. So I mean, she's done a really good job on building that audience, and then Dr. Shiloh and Dr. Scott also were very well established before I came along.
Well, let's talk about like building it from scratch, because that's one of the things I like to share is like the nuts and bolts of the stuff that we do. So you got on the end watch, and it was like ground zero, right?
Yeah. I mean, it was for the first few a couple months or so, we didn't have that big of a listenership, but fortunately, Bootsy and Sal have they have great access to people who have a following in that community, and like I said, that it's sort of a small world, and everybody kind of knows who everybody is, and we've been able to really grow based on having some really great guests and people that have stuck around and listened. We've been on a hiatus for the last couple of months, or last 6 weeks or so, but we're going to get recording again. But I mean, it's a lot of it's just appealing to that audience so that they share and touch people that are like them to listen. And the good news for us, for End of Watch, is that the law enforcement community is so supportive of each other. I mean, I reached out to a couple of guests for this coming season that I had zero faith that they would respond. But I had heard that, on a specific podcast, one of these guests had mentioned that he has lately struggled with some stressors based on his service as an officer. And I mean, this guy's huge, but I found a contact information for him and I emailed him and he got back to me. And so those kinds of connections tend to grow the audience because you're leveraging, and that's not I don't mean that to sound like it's a bad thing, but you're leveraging the people that want to hear what they have to say. And then if, some of those people are like, oh, I like the style of this or whatever, and they hang on and they say, I'll subscribe to your podcast because I appreciate what you did with, this person that I've followed here. That's a good thing. And so, for us with both, Lou and Kevin's connections, we've had good success with that. With Dale Dye, like I just kind of blindly emailed him, and I mean he has been a technical advisor on some of the biggest movies in cinema history.
Mm-hmm.
Military movies like Saving Private Ryan or Platoon or whatever.
Yeah,
and he got back to me within a few minutes, and
wow.
And I had no link to him whatsoever. So I think part of it's just finding people that fit your voice, the voice of your show, and then just like you have nothing to lose by reaching out. Like, what you'll get a no, okay, fine, you'll move on.
Yeah, I mean, like every once in a while, it's very rare that I get somebody that'll big time me. I mean, like most of the time, people either they don't respond or they reply back that they're busy if it's a no.
Yeah, exactly.
But I've only had two people big time me the whole time I've been doing this show the last 2 years, and those folks I'm just like, oh well, wasn't a good fit. Time to move on.
That's it. That's the thing, and then going back to it, it's fine. I mean, you just find somebody else to fill that void, and
I had one guy, Jason. He wanted $100,000 for a 1 hour interview.
What?
That's when I say big time in me. I'm like, come on, man.
All right, next you ask me on the show, I'm gonna say that. Just kidding.
I'm telling you, I'm like, but it's crazy because I had a communications professor, an English professor in college, and his name was Dr. David Taylor, and he was talking about the audience,
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I mean, like to me, everything goes back to storytelling. We talked a lot about storytelling, but it goes back to storytelling. And he said, you got to think about your audience first, right? And you got to give them what they want and give it to them real good, And this is a guy with a PhD in English, So he's one of the guys that he would be one of these guys that you would think that he's going to have like all proper English and all that.
Right.
you know, and he's like, give them what they want, give it to them real good. Chad, get out of the studio, man. Chad Carvel's trying to like, he's trying to cut in on my time. I'm calling you out, odd lot. Chad Carvel's a local comedian. He's trying to come in here with some kind of food.
Homemade coconut cake.
I love it, man. I love it.
Pieces even.
Get out of here, Chad. Chad's the co-host for Savannah at Night. Oh man, yeah. So anyway, talking about the audience, you know, he said give them what they want, give it to them real good. So I always thought about that. I'm like, you know, go back to that. Okay, well, who's my audience? You know, who would be listening to the show, or who would want to read the story or watch the film or whatever? You know,
Right.
who's that audience? And you know, if you're doing it just for yourself, fine. Then but don't expect anybody else to watch it or read it or listen to it. You know,
Sure.
if you like true crime and you're doing a show about true crime, you know, you're not going to want to talk about like the interior maintenance of a mechanical system.
Right. Yeah.
You know?
You produce. Exactly right. You produce for your audience, and yeah, that's super important. I mean, it goes back to cave paintings and things like that, like where specific storytellers were crafting stories for a specific audience. And I mean, that's the one of the few things that binds us as people is these stories. I mean, I wrote a screenplay a while back that I was having a really hard time actually crafting it. And I went back and I kind of blew it up and decided, you know what, I'm going to tell this story because it was a Southern fishing story, which my granddad, both of my granddads actually loved fishing. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to tell this through the eyes of basically a granddad.
Cool.
And I reformatted the film, there's the screenplay through that lens, and it worked. And so I think that's just kind of how people connect with stories, and it's just, you know, you just have to try to find that audience and connect with that audience in whatever avenue. And there are more avenues now to connect with that audience, but you have to find yours and speak to them.
Yeah, I agree. Hey, everybody, you listen to WRUU LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul. You know, I feel like that's an important part of storytelling. Either the audience member, the person watching or listening or reading it, they can see themselves in the shoes of the main character or the perspective of it. Or if, you know, for example, there's first person storytelling and there's like third person objective, you know, storytelling. And the first person one, you really want the audience to identify with the character. You really want them to, you know, like if it's a murder mystery, you want them to be like the detective, you know? And then as the reader, you're like, oh, you get to see some of the outside stuff that the detective doesn't know about yet. But I like this kind of stories that, you know, when you're reading it, that you're following along and you're kind of like hung out in the dark as well, you know, like with the Ray Bradbury stuff. You know, there's been several stories that I've read that I'm like, what? That's how it ended?
Right.
You know, and like he had one the other day that I read called The Garbage Collector. And the story is set kind of like in a Cold War era.
Okay.
Where these garbage men, they have, you know, like their job, they go out and collect trash and, you know, whatever. And he said they makes, you know, a game of it with his driver partner, you know, and that during the Cold War, you know, this is like going on during the Cold War, that their truck is retrofitted with this radio system, and it's like an emergency broadcast type system. And, you know, you get to the very end of the story and he's like, you know, he loves his job And then one day he comes home and he tells his wife, he's like, I can't do this anymore. And she's like, what? How are, what are we going to do? How are you going to quit your job? And he says to her, he's like, we get our trucks retrofitted with, this emergency broadcast system. And now we're, if we get called in, we're going to go pick up the bodies. And she's like, what? Talking about nuclear fallout.
Yeah.
And that the trashmen, they were going to be called in to pick up bodies. And, then he's going through all these thoughts, like how many bodies can actually fit in a trash truck and, all this crazy stuff or whatever. And, and it just ends like abruptly. And you're like, what? What just happened there? And I feel like if you like that kind of cliffhanger or suspense or whatever, you get into it. If it's not, if you're like a romance reader where they want the happily ever after, ending, and you give somebody a sad ending, they're not going to be happy. The audience member is not going to be happy with that. So I feel like it is important that you understand who your audience is, or at least who you're trying to, talk to or, target or whatever. And I think one of the things that you said earlier last hour, like about filmmaking, is, the doing it because you love it, working on it because it's a lot of work. I mean, like this show, I try to do all my production value during the show. I don't really make a lot of edits unless there's like a big, kerfluffle. I don't, I put it out. I keep the same, underwriting and all that stuff. But I list it all, I make sure like each time I do it, I ask the guests the same things. I ask them for a nice photo. I ask them for a short bio and a link. And then when I load it up, I use Libsyn to host it. I make, the same stuff so that it goes out to Apple Podcasts, and it also goes out to Spotify, because those were the three biggest ones that I was having success with.
Sure.
And, I upload it. I do the same process every week, and so the audience, they come to know, okay, well, he's going to do the radio show live on Sundays, and then, that night or the next day, it's going to be the podcast. And then I put it out, on social media. I put it on my website. And I send it to the guests. I let the guests know, hey, this is available. But I do those things, over and over. It's like a little system that I have for it,
Yeah.
And I feel like when I'm doing that, I might have a small audience. I might have, consistent, group of people that listen to it all the time. But I feel like I don't want to let them down, by not having that, same consistency. Or if I do make a change, I don't try to just dump it on them. I try to, like kind of incorporate it into what I'm already doing.
Right.
So for example, I've got a small email list, and what I wanted to do was change it over from just like me to my Valhalla book stuff. So I sent an email out saying, hey, I'm going to be, talking more about Valhalla books. And I think, it's important. I mean, like, I wish I had millions of listeners, but I value and love every single one of my people.
Right.
I mean, it'd be great to have like a show that's like, oh, you know what? You got sponsors and you got advertisers and you got all this stuff, whatever. It'd be great. But, I'm trying to be realistic, And so the folks that do engage with my show, I'm like, man, I love this. I really appreciate it, and so I feel like the audience is, why do it otherwise?
Right.
I mean, I think that's one thing that I feel like with new folks that are trying to do something, that they get caught up kind of on the other stuff sometimes, and they forget about like the story or the audience.
Right.
They're like, oh, well, if I do, if I have all the bells and whistles, it's like, nobody cares about that, man. They just care about the story, or they care about, how do they connect with you,
Absolutely. Yeah. You can't get caught up on the metrics. You have to be true. You have to tell your truth, or, the truth that, your show's truth. Same thing goes with writing. You have to be true to that world that you're creating, or people will sniff it out and they won't connect with it, and then it just will not go anywhere. And it's the same thing. You can't get bogged down with all the things that, at the end of the day can be excuses, like, oh, I don't have the right, theme, or I don't have the right equipment, or whatever. Like, now you can tell your story on a smartphone.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of ways that you can be true to yourself as a creator, and
I think it goes to the devil's in the details and getting hung up on the mechanics, right?
Yeah.
It's the difference between like talking about doing it and doing it.
Yes, absolutely.
And if you get hung up on, well, it's not going to be perfect, or I don't have all the resources, or I don't have this, or I don't have that. If you get hung up on the don'ts, you never will.
Right.
And
I promise you, it'll never be perfect.
Yeah, even if it is like people are like, oh man, it's so great. You're like, you can always see something that you would want to change.
Absolutely, it'll never be perfect. Just do it. Nike got it right. Just do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, put the shoes on and run.
Yep.
I've been listening to James Clear's Atomic Habits.
Okay.
And he talks about like building new habits and spending 2 minutes like just starting the habit, getting it. So like if you want to write a script, you don't know how to do it. Well, you spend 2 minutes, the first 2 minutes, but you make it consistent. So like if it's every night
Right.
at 6:30 or, whatever, and then, one action leads to another, and it builds. And I love the connecting with people. I love building relationships with people, because that, the things come and go. But if you focus on the folks and the people, you're gonna do a lot better. I feel like.
I completely agree with you, man.
So.
And I'm so glad that our paths cross, because we are certainly kindred spirits.
Definitely, man, definitely. So, Jason, thanks so much for being on the show. Where can people check out your stuff?
Okay, so my website, which will launch soon, will be jasonusrycreates.com, and that should have links to my screenplays, both produced, and samples of things, also podcasts that I'm involved with.
Awesome.
My novel that's
And then it's an End to Watch with Bootsy and Sal, right?
Yes, and Watch with Bootsy and Sal is the one that I've been involved with since the start. Also, Dialogue, a True Crime Conversation, and LA Not So Confidential.
And you're going to have links to all that on your new website, right?
I will, yes.
Awesome.
And I'll send you a link to share with the audience as soon as that's up, hopefully this week.
Okay, cool. All right, well, everybody, thank you for tuning in today. You've been listening